The hum is the first thing you notice. The last thing, too. It's the sound of the city's cast-off life being mulched, sterilized, and reconstituted. It's the sound of my job. Sub-level 7, filtration and reclamation. My little kingdom of pipes and gauges. Today, the hum felt off-key, soured by annoyance. "Elias, you magnificent bastard," I muttered, wrench tight in my hand. "Pick a great day to be unwell." His station was empty, his diagnostic slate dark. Typical. He'd leave me to wrestle with filter block 12C on my own. It was a secondary unit, usually a simple flush and cycle, but the pressure gauge was stubbornly in the red. A clog. Again. "All right, you rusty bucket," I grunted, fitting the wrench to the primary release valve. Procedure dictates a 3-stage pressure release before manual inspection. 1. Turn the valve a quarter turn counterclockwise. A hiss of compressed air, smelling of ammonia and wet metal. 2. Wait for the pressure to equalize. A slow process you learn to feel in the soles of your boots. My boots were Syn-Chow standard issue, regulation 88B, just like my jumpsuit, my gloves, my whole orderly existence. I found comfort in that, a place for everything and everything in its place. I was mid-thought, my hand hovering for the 3rd stage, when the world ended. Not with a bang, but with the shriek of a klaxon that tore through the facility's gentle hum. The overhead lumen panels flickered once, twice, and died, plunging the vast chamber into a blood-red nightmare courtesy of the emergency strobes. My heart hammered against my ribs, a wild animal in a cage of corporate procedure. My mind raced through the manual. Chemical spill, code yellow. Structural failure, code orange. This was neither. This was a sound I'd only ever heard in drills, a catastrophic, throat-ripping howl that meant one thing. A synthesized voice, stripped of all humanity, echoed from the walls. "Protocol 7 initiated. Containment breach. All personnel secure in place. This is not a drill." Before I could even process the words, a deafening groan of metal on metal filled the air. Across the gantry, 50 meters away, the main access blast door began to descend. A slab of reinforced steel, 10 meters high, a tombstone for a giant. My gut twisted. That was my way out. I thought of running, a purely animal instinct, but I was frozen, a statue in red-lit horror. Thoom. The sound was absolute. It wasn't just a slam, it was a final, system-wide declaration. A period at the end of a death sentence. The klaxon cut out, leaving behind a silence so profound it felt louder than the alarm. The red strobes continued their silent, rhythmic pulse, painting the dripping pipes and stagnant pools of iridescent sludge in waves of crimson. I stood there, wrench still in my hand, my breath fogging in the chilled, suddenly predatory air. The facility's gentle hum was gone, replaced by the soft tick, tick, tick of cooling metal, and the slow, heavy plip, plop of viscous fluid dripping from a joint somewhere in the oppressive darkness above. I was alone. I was sealed in. The system I had trusted, the procedures that gave my life meaning, had just locked me in a cage. And I had no idea what they were trying to contain. Panic, is inefficient. It clouds judgment and deviates from established procedure. I repeated that little mantra, a quote from the Syn-Chow employee handbook, as I fumbled for the comlink on my belt. My fingers felt like clumsy sausages under the strobing red light. Kalen to control. Junior Technician Kalen reporting a Protocol 7 lockdown on Sublevel 7. Please advise. Static. Not the gentle hiss of an open channel, but a dead, impenetrable wall of it. A void where a voice should be. Control, do you copy? This is Kalen, filtration. My comms are non-responsive. I tapped the unit, a useless, frantic gesture. Nothing. Okay, Kalen. Primary comms are down. Switch to secondary hardline. My boots echoed on the metal grating as I moved towards the emergency intercom panel near the main vat array. The air was thick, heavy, with the stench of ozone and the cloying, sweet undertone of nutrient concentrate. It clung to the back of my throat. I keyed the panel. Dead. The activation light didn't even flicker. My meticulously ordered world was starting to fray at the edges. Annoyance was curdling into a thick, cold dread in the pit of my stomach. Security overrides. As a technician, I had clearance for local system access. A short walk across the gantry, my shadow leaping and contorting in the crimson light, brought me to a small security station tucked into an alcove. A single monitor and a keypad, usually displaying filter flow data, sat dark. I slapped the activation strip. The screen flickered to life with a low hum, displaying the Syn-Chow corporate logo for a torturous second before defaulting to the emergency camera feed. The feed was from camera X14, overlooking the main blast door I had just seen slam shut. From the outside. Relief washed over me for a second. They were here. Rescue. A hazmat team for a chemical spill, most likely. Protocol 7 must have been an automated overreaction. But what I saw on the monitor stole the air from my lungs. It wasn't a hazmat team. It was Syn-Chow corporate security, decked out in full tactical armor, their helmets gleaming in the steady white light of the upper levels. They weren't trying to open the door. They were reinforcing it. Two of them were welding heavy steel plates over the seams, sending showers of white-hot sparks into the pristine corridor. Another was wiring a secondary locking mechanism to the external control panel. They were adding locks. I leaned closer, my breath fogging the screen. They were working with a cold, terrifying efficiency. There was no urgency in their movements, no sign of an impending rescue. This was a burial. They were sealing the tomb from the outside. My brain struggled to connect the dots. A clog in filter 12C. Elias is a no-show, a containment breach, dead comms, an unbreakable seal. The methodical rule follower in my head screamed that this was an error, a cascade of malfunctions. But the man staring at the screen, at the welders calmly entombing him, knew better. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate. I sank to my knees, the hard grate biting into my shins. The dread was no longer a pool in my stomach. It was an ocean, and I was drowning in it. They weren't keeping something out. They were keeping me in. Hope is a dangerous thing. It makes you reckless. But trapped in the strobing red dark, with the knowledge that my corporate saviors were actually my undertakers, hope was the only tool I had left. My mind, trained to see systems and schematics, frantically searched for a back door, a flaw in the design, and it found one. The deep-level emergency maintenance drain, an old system predating the new automated protocols. It was a relic, a direct-line drainage tunnel that bypassed the primary grid entirely. It emptied into the sub-city aqueducts, a foul and unsanctioned exit, but an exit nonetheless. Elias used to joke about it. When the suits finally screw the pooch, he'd said, "That's our way out, kid, the drowned path." I'd dismissed it as the ramblings of a bitter old man. Now, it was a prayer. Finding the entrance to the lower crawlways was easy enough, a maintenance hatch I'd walked over 1,000 times. Opening it unleashed a wave of air so foul it made the ambient chemical stink of the filtration floor seem like a perfume. It was the smell of true decay, of stagnant water and things that had long since dissolved in the dark. I descended into the blackness, my mag torch cutting a shaky, pale beam through the oppressive gloom. The crawlway was narrow, a ribcage of ancient pipes and rusted conduits. A thick layer of viscous black slime coated every surface, and my boots made sucking sounds with every step. My pristine regulation jumpsuit was already stained with filth. The rules, the order I craved, they didn't exist down here. This was the facility's guts, the ugly, forgotten truth beneath the polished steel. The journey was a tense, claustrophobic nightmare. Things skittered just outside my torchlight. Water, thick and oily, dripped from overhead pipes, a steady, maddening rhythm. I had to contort my body to squeeze through gaps, the cold slime seeping into my collar, my gloves. Every sound, every scrape of metal sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. Finally, after what felt like an hour of navigating the maze, I saw it. A small steel door marked with a faded, almost illegible stencil. DRAIN Control C3. The room should have been sealed, pristine, an emergency access point, rarely used, kept in perfect working order. That was protocol. The door hung ajar. A cold fist squeezed my heart. I pushed it open. The room was a mess. Tools were scattered across the floor, and papers were strewn from an overturned filing cabinet. It looked like someone had left in a violent hurry. My light fell upon the control panel, and my final, desperate hope died. It wasn't just broken, it was savaged. The console was a wreck of shattered glass and ripped-out wiring. A heavy pipe wrench, not unlike the one I still carried, lay embedded in the main breaker switch. This was deliberate, calculated sabotage. Someone had made sure this path would never be used again. My torch beam drifted from the smashed panel to the small, reinforced window that overlooked the tunnel entrance itself. I pressed my face against the cold glass. The tunnel wasn't dark. It was filled to the ceiling with a churning black liquid, bubbling with a sickly chemical iridescence. A steady stream of caustic runoff was still pouring into it from a deliberately ruptured pipe overhead. Even through the thick glass, I could smell the acrid, burning scent of industrial solvent. It was impassable, an acid moat. I stumbled back from the window, the mag torch slipping from my numb fingers and clattering to the floor. Its beam spun wildly, illuminating the wreckage of the room in frantic flashes. My escape route wasn't just gone. It had been murdered. Despair has its own gravity. It pulled me down onto an overturned crate in the wrecked control room, The wild beam of my dropped torch, a fitting spotlight for my shattered thoughts. Escape was impossible. The facility was my tomb. And as I sat there, stewing in the stench of decay and defeat, Elias's words echoed in my head. Not his jokes about the drowned path, but his other ramblings, the ones I'd tuned out as the paranoia of a man 10 years too long on the job. He'd talked about ghost readings on his sensors, about undocumented power draws from sections of the grid that weren't on any schematic. "There's another layer to this place, Kalen," he'd slurred once over a cheap beer after shift. "Something underneath the underneath. Something hungry." His workstation. He had his own private terminal, hidden behind a false panel in Maintenance Sector Gamma. A gross violation of Syn-Chow IT policy. A place for his secrets. Suddenly, I needed to see them. It wasn't hope anymore. It was a desperate need for answers. If I was going to die in this place, I deserved to know why. Navigating back to Sector Gamma felt different. I was no longer a trapped employee. I was an archaeologist picking through the ruins of my own belief system. The hidden panel was exactly where Elias had described it. Behind it sat a small, battered work terminal, humming softly in the dark. The security lock was low-grade, a simple password prompt. Elias wasn't a tech whiz. He was a creature of habit and sentiment. I typed in Maria 78, his late wife's name and the year they were married. The screen flashed and unlocked, granting me access to a madman's diary. The desktop was a chaotic mess of personal logs and corrupted data files. I found a folder labeled Reports Unsent. Inside was a single document, a formal report addressed to Site Supervisor Mendez. It was dense with technical jargon, but I understood enough. Elias had documented persistent, anomalous biological readings in the primary reclamation vats. Microorganism counts were off the charts, but the signatures matched nothing in the Syn-Chow database. Nothing terrestrial. He'd tracked the source to an unlisted auxiliary filtration layer, a system that ran parallel to the ones I maintain. A ghost in the machine. Then I found the other file, buried deep in a nested folder labeled "Oh God." It was a secured corporate document. Its title sent a chill down my spine. Empty Plate Protocol. Eyes only. My fingers trembled as I clicked it open. It wasn't a technical manual. It was a harvesting directive. Page after page of chillingly sterile corporate language described the containment and processing of a novel, protein-rich biological entity, designation LV4. The document detailed how the entity, a semi-sentient colonial organism, was being cultivated in the city's deepest wastewater and refuse systems, a natural byproduct of unchecked urban consumption. Our facility wasn't just processing waste, it was its farm. The undocumented filtration layer was designed to selectively harvest these things. The document spoke of their high nutritional value, their rapid regeneration, the true cost of consumption. The slogan was right there on our lunch trays. The gray, odorless nutrient paste we all ate. The cornerstone of Syn-Chow's market dominance. The cheap food that fed a billion mouths in the sterile archaeologies above. It wasn't synthetic. It wasn't soy or algae. We were eating the city's rot. We were eating the creatures that grew in our own filth. And the clog in filter 12C, the containment breach. Elias hadn't just found a ghost. He had poked the monster in its cage. The knowledge from Elias's terminal was a poison. It seeped into me, changing the very architecture of my reality. The humming pipes no longer sounded like machinery. They sounded like a digestive tract. The dripping sludge wasn't just waste, it was effluence. I wasn't a technician in a factory. I was a janitor in a slaughterhouse, and I was locked inside with the cattle. Armed with Elias's crude, hand-drawn map from his logs, I made my way towards the coordinates he'd marked as the auxiliary filter hub. It led me down a service ladder into a section of the sublevel that felt fundamentally wrong. The air was warmer here, thick with a primal, coppery stench, like an ancient swamp. The metal walkways were slick with a translucent, gelatinous slime that pulsed faintly in my torchlight. This place was not on any of my schematics. It was a secret, cancerous growth within the facility's orderly design. My light caught a massive cylindrical structure ahead, a filtration unit, but one of a brutal alien design. It lacked the usual Syn-Chow polish, its surface a mesh of thick, greasy cables and organic-looking valves. This was it. As I drew closer, a familiar and dreadful shape came into focus, caught in a wide-meshed intake grate near the unit's base. It was the source of the clog in 12C, the reason for this whole nightmare. A technician's jumpsuit, shredded and stained a dark brown. I felt bile rise in my throat as my torch beam traced up the tattered fabric. It was Elias's arm, severed cleanly at the shoulder, his ID band still clasped tightly around the wrist. He hadn't been a no-show. He'd been a delivery. Just behind his mangled limb, something else was tangled in the mesh. It was one of them, a creature. It was pallid and translucent, its skin a sickly white. Maybe 2 meters long, it had too many limbs, thin and jointed like a spider's legs, but ending in delicate 3-fingered hands. It didn't have eyes, just a smooth, featureless head that writhed weakly. It looked less like a predator and more like a grotesque larva, wounded and dying. A wave of pity mixed with my disgust. It was just a creature, harvested and ground into paste like everything else. But as I watched, its head arched back, and a small, perfectly round mouth opened in its smooth face. It issued a sound that was utterly anathema to this place of humming machines. It was a high, piercing shriek, a sound of pure electronic pain and biological distress, a sound that drilled directly into my skull. The moment the shriek faded, my blood ran cold. From the darkness all around me, from the cavernous maws of a dozen enormous intake pipes, the sound was answered. It came back in a chorus of clicks, whistles, and terrifyingly similar shrieks. Dozens of them. They weren't echoes. They were responses. I had stumbled into their nest, their processing chamber, and this wounded one had just sounded the dinner bell. Behind me, from the dark corridor I'd just emerged from, came a new sound. It wasn't a shriek or a whistle. It was the chillingly distinct, wet, scrabbling noise of claws skittering on slime-coated metal. And it was approaching fast. Panic is a cold, sharp thing. It bypassed every rational thought, every procedural instinct, and screamed a single, primal word: run. I turned and fled, my boots slipping on the slick walkway, the cacophony of echoing shrieks and the rapidly closing skittering of claws at my back. My mag torch beam danced wildly, painting the horrifying organic architecture of the secret level in strobing flashes of light. Pipes like intestines, valves like tumors. I wasn't on a gantry. I was running through the guts of some titanic beast. I scrambled up a service ladder, heaving myself back onto the familiar grating-covered floor of the main filtration level. The sounds pursued me, amplified by the metallic corridors. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just ran, my lungs burning, my mind a blank slate of pure terror. Ahead, bathed in the pulsing red of the emergency lights, I saw a familiar sight. A heavy, circular door with a bright yellow hazard sign, Sterilization Chamber C4. It was a high-pressure cleansing room used for decontaminating equipment. A dead end, but it was also a fortress. With a final, desperate burst of speed, I launched myself at the door's control wheel. It was a heavy, manual system designed for emergencies. My hands, slick with slime and sweat, struggled to get a purchase. The skittering was right behind me now, so close I could smell its foul, swamp-like odor. I threw all my weight into the wheel, groaning with the effort. The thick steel door began to slide shut with a low hydraulic hiss. A pale, multi-limbed blur shot past the narrowing gap. I saw a flash of a smooth, featureless head and long, spindly legs. I put my shoulder into the wheel and shoved, the mechanism groaning in protest. Just as the creature turned, a clawed hand lashing out, the door slid into its frame with a deep, resonant thump. The locking bolts slammed home with a series of heavy, satisfying clunks. An instant later, a tremendous impact slammed against the door's exterior, making the entire steel frame shudder. Then another. A furious, frantic scrabbling echoed from the other side. But it held. I collapsed against the cool inner wall, chest heaving, listening to the futile rage of the creature outside. I was safe. I was trapped in a small, sterile, circular room, maybe 4 meters across. But I was safe. The walls were gleaming stainless steel, and a ring of nozzles pointed towards the center. The air inside was cool and smelled of antiseptic. It was the cleanest, most wonderful place in the world. My eyes fell on the chamber's interior control panel, still glowing with a soft, green standby light. It was on a separate power circuit. It was still active. Suddenly, I wasn't just prey anymore. A plan, vicious and beautiful, bloomed in my mind. The sterilization cycle used superheated steam, injected at over 300 pounds per square inch. It could strip flesh from bone in seconds. I could wait for the creature to lose interest, then crack the door and unleash a hellstorm of searing steam into the corridor. I had a weapon. I took a shaky, deep breath. The methodical technician was back. I just needed to survive long enough to use it. Hope, I was learning, was a flickering candle in a hurricane. No sooner had the plan to weaponize the sterilization chamber formed than the universe decided to snuff it out. A deep groan shuddered through the facility, the low-frequency hum of a primary generator failing somewhere in the dark. The green standby light on the control panel I was staring at flickered violently, turned orange, and then died with a sickening fizz, a wisp of acrid smoke curling from its seams. A power surge. The entire panel was fried. My weapon was gone. Worse, the groan from the failing generator was answered by a new sound from the door beside me. It was a low, protesting screech of metal, the sound of the magnetic locking bolts beginning to disengage. Click, a long pause, clunk. The power surge hadn't just killed my offense, it had critically wounded my defense. The frantic, random scrabbling from outside the chamber stopped. The silence that followed was somehow more terrifying. Then, a new sound began. A soft, deliberate tap, tap, tap against the chamber's small, reinforced observation window. It wasn't the sound of blind rage. It was the sound of inspection. I crept towards the window, a thick circle of reinforced polyglass, no bigger than a dinner plate. Peering through, I saw them. It wasn't just one anymore. A small pack of 3 had gathered. They were pushing the first one forward, a grotesque parody of curiosity. Its featureless head was tilted, as if it were listening to the groaning lock. Its thin, 3-fingered hand was the one tapping the glass, testing it. Then, with a sudden, coordinated movement, one of the others lunged. Not at the door, but at the window. It struck the glass with a heavy, bony carpal joint. A loud crack echoed through my small prison, and a thin, white line appeared in the glass. They weren't just animals. They were problem solvers. They were hunters. A new terror set in, cold and claustrophobic. This wasn't a sanctuary. It was a display case, a terrarium, and I was the specimen. They began to strike the window in a horrifying rhythm. One would ram its head against the spot, another would strike with a clawed hand. Crack, thump, crack. With each impact, new fractures branched out from the center, creating a beautiful, terrifying spiderweb of compromised glass. They were dismantling my tomb from the outside. I backed away, pressing myself against the far wall, my eyes glued to the slowly shattering window. There was nowhere to run. The room was a sterile, featureless circle. The groaning of the dying lock and the percussive cracking of the window became a symphony of my impending death. They were methodical, they were intelligent, and they were just about to break in. The thin barrier of polyglass was all that stood between me and the shrieking, writhing truth behind the city's endless, mindless consumption. My meticulously ordered life had led me here, to this transparent cage, waiting to be devoured. The end came with a sound like tearing fabric, amplified 1,000 times. A pale, 3-fingered claw punched through the center of the spiderweb, followed by a spray of granulated polyglass that glittered like deadly snowflakes in the red emergency light. The things outside shrieked in triumph. My time was up. Staying put was death, a messy, screaming, terrible death. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. The fear didn't vanish, but it was consumed by a cold, tectonic rage. The methodical, rule-following technician was gone. The man who just wanted to survive was gone. In their place was something hard and absolute. If I was going to die, I was going to break the machine. I was going to burn this whole God-forsaken slaughterhouse to the ground. My mind, warped by terror and fury, latched onto a detail from the empty plate protocol I'd read on Elias's terminal. Section 5, subsection C. In the event of catastrophic culture contamination, a full sub-level system flush may be triggered via the manual override at the primary intake control spire. Note, the resulting vortex is total and non-survivable. A full system flush. The emergency reset. A protocol so dangerous it was meant to be triggered remotely from the surface, only in the direst of circumstances. It would open the main intake valve to 100% capacity, creating a whirlpool that would suck everything on the processing floor, sludge, machinery, creatures, technicians, into the primary grinders below. It wasn't an escape plan. It was a murder-suicide pact with the entire facility. I looked at the claw wriggling through the shattered window, then up at the ceiling. A small, square maintenance vent secured with 4 simple bolts. My path. The decision was irreversible, and with it came a strange, exhilarating calm. I was no longer prey. I was the agent of this place's destruction. My life would be the cost, but the cover-up would die with me. The company, the suits who welded me in here, who fed this horror to the unsuspecting masses, they would lose their precious harvest. I would foul the crop. I would starve the machine. All right, I whispered to the shrieking things on the other side of the door, a grim smile touching my lips. You want in? Come on. I know a place with more to eat. Ignoring the failing door, I dragged a loose maintenance canister under the ceiling vent. Climbing onto it, I pulled the heavy industrial wrench from my belt. My wrench. The tool of my orderly, pointless life. Now it was the key to unlocking chaos. I began to turn the bolts, my movements no longer frantic, but precise and deliberate. Each turn was a quiet declaration of war. Each scraped thread of metal was a nail in this facility's coffin. Let them break in. I had bigger problems to solve. I had a promise to keep to the grinders below. The last bolt came free, just as the sterilization chamber door finally gave way with a screech of tortured metal. I didn't look down. I scrambled up into the cramped, dusty darkness of the ventilation shaft as the first of the creatures poured into the room below, shrieking in frustration at their empty prize. I didn't stop. I crawled, the rough metal scraping my hands and knees, following the faint current of air that told me I was headed for the main processing floor. I emerged through a wide grate, kicking it open and dropping onto a high gantry overlooking a vision of industrial hell. This was the heart of Sublevel 7. A vast, cavernous chamber, a kilometer long, filled with the silhouettes of colossal vats, churning mixers, and conveyor belts that snaked like steel intestines through the red-lit gloom. And down below, on the main floor, they were moving. Dozens of them, pale, skittering shapes darting between machines, their clicks and shrieks echoing in the immense space. My target was visible in the distance. The control spire, a lone pillar of technology rising from the center of the floor, crowned with the brutal, oversized wheel of the manual flush override. It was a suicide run across an open hunting ground. But this was my ground too. I had spent years here. I knew its weaknesses, its plumbing. Hanging from my gantry, I swung my wrench and struck a high-pressure conduit marked with a faded hazard stripe. With a percussive bang, the pipe ruptured, spraying a thick, foul-smelling stream of raw, unprocessed sludge onto the floor below. The creatures near the blast shrieked and recoiled. The sudden deluge of filth masked my scent and, more importantly, created a wall of chaotic noise that baffled their sensitive hearing. It was my smokescreen. I dropped to a lower level, landing with a grunt, and began my sprint. It was a terrifying, desperate steeplechase. I vaulted over conveyor belts, slid under crushing pistons, and weaved between the humming monolithic grinders. The creatures were relentless. I could see them flanking me, their pale forms moving with terrifying speed through the shadows. One of them managed to cut me off, dropping from an overhead pipe directly in my path. I didn't slow down. I grabbed a loose piece of scrap metal from a hopper and hurled it at a cluster of pressure gauges on a nearby mixing vat. The glass shattered, the needles went wild, and with a roar, the vat's emergency release valve blew, engulfing the creature in a torrent of semi-solid nutrient paste. It was buried, flailing, under the very stuff it was meant to become. Each step was a calculation. Use the noise, use the environment. I became a ghost in my own machine, a saboteur in the factory I once so dutifully maintained. The sounds of their pursuit were a constant, terrifying chorus behind me, but the spire was getting closer. Its stark, mechanical shape was a promise. I wasn't just running from them, I was running toward my final, terrible purpose. The whole monstrous system had to be fed, and I was about to give it a feast. My lungs were on fire, my side a knot of searing pain, but the base of the control spire was right in front of me. I scrambled up the short ladder to the graded platform, the colossal override wheel dominating the space. My victory was inches away. And then it rose from the shadows behind the control console to meet me. It was an alpha, vastly larger than the others. Its pale skin was a roadmap of thick keloid scars. One of its spindly front limbs ended not in a hand, but in a ragged stump. It was a survivor, a veteran of whatever brutal hierarchy existed in the filth below. Its featureless head swiveled towards me, and it let out a low, guttural hiss that was less a shriek and more a statement of ownership. This was its territory. There was no time for finesse. It lunged, and I met it with a desperate two-handed swing of my wrench. The heavy steel connected with its side with a sickening, wet crunch. The creature recoiled, hissing in pain, giving me the second I needed. I threw myself at the override wheel. It was cold, heavy, and stiff from disuse. I strained, muscles screaming in protest, and with a groan of ancient metal, it moved. Barely a centimeter. The alpha was on me again. A clawed hand shot out, and I threw myself back. The claws raked across my chest, shredding my jumpsuit and the flesh beneath. The pain was white-hot, but my objective was singular. I rolled, came up to my feet, and kicked out at one of its spindly legs, knocking it off balance. Another precious second bought. I lunged back to the wheel. Heave, another centimeter. The air in the chamber was changing. A low, powerful thrum began to vibrate up through the floor, the sound of the primary intake beginning to open. The alpha shrieked in fury and charged again. This time I was too slow. It slammed into me, knocking me away from the wheel and onto my back. Its weight was crushing. Its round, pit-like mouth opened inches from my face, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. I jammed the length of my wrench into its maw, the metal grating against bone. It thrashed, trying to dislodge the tool, its claws tearing at my arms. Below us, the thrum was becoming a roar. The pull was tangible now, a steady, invisible current tugging at my clothes, at my hair. The alpha, sensing the new danger, seemed to hesitate. That was its mistake. With a final, desperate surge of adrenaline, I shoved it off me. It stumbled back, and in that instant, I saw my last move. I couldn't turn the wheel any further, but I could break the last rule. My eyes locked onto the safety regulator, a complex nest of brass gears designed to prevent the valve from ever opening more than 70%. I knew that system. I'd serviced it myself. I didn't even aim. I just threw my wrench with all my remaining strength. It crashed into the gears with a scream of shredding metal. The fail-safe shattered. The override wheel spun freely, its purpose undone. The roar became a deafening vortex. The gentle pull became an irresistible force. The alpha, caught off balance, was lifted from its feet. It shrieked, a sound of pure terror this time, as the hurricane pull of the intake valve dragged it backwards over the edge of the platform. I clung to the railing, watching as the massive creature was sucked into the vast, dark maw of the primary grinder below, disappearing in a blur of pale limbs. The pull tore at me, threatening to drag me over with it, and then the world went black. Consciousness returned not as a gentle dawn, but as a series of sharp, painful jolts. The first sensation was cold, wet steel against my cheek. The second was a chorus of agony from every joint and muscle in my body. I blinked, my vision swimming. The pulsing red emergency lights were gone, replaced by the flat, merciless glare of the main power grid, which must have kicked back on. I pushed myself up with a groan, a grinding in my shoulder telling me something was badly broken. I had been thrown by the vortex's initial blast wave, not pulled directly in, hurled against a support pillar 50 feet from the control spire. I was alive, but the world I woke up in was silent. The roar of the intake was gone, the hum of machinery was gone, the shrieks of the creatures were gone. The only sound was the slow, steady drip, drip, drip of liquid falling from 1,000 different points in the vast, cavernous space. I staggered to my feet, leaning heavily against the pillar, and surveyed my kingdom of ruin. The main processing floor was a charnel house of twisted metal and shattered equipment. Conveyor belts were snapped, gantries had collapsed, and entire mixing vats were torn from their moorings. The catastrophic flush had done its job. And everywhere, coating every surface, was the slurry. A thick, viscous, red-brown tide of organic matter and nutrient fluid. It was ankle-deep where I stood, pooled into small lakes in the depressions of the floor. It was the aftermath, the harvest. It was the pulped, liquefied remains of the alpha, of its entire colony, mixed with tons of the company's precious nutrient concentrate. The smell was overwhelming, a stomach-churning blend of a slaughterhouse and a chemical factory. It was the smell of the truth. I took a shaky step, then another, my broken body a ruin amidst the wreckage. A strange sense of calm settled over me. There was no rage left, no terror, just a profound, hollowed-out emptiness. I had won. I had survived. This was what victory looked like. A silent, stinking, blood-soaked abattoir. In the distance, a new sound began to filter down from the world above. Faint at first, then growing steadily stronger. Sirens. They were cutting through the blast doors. The outside world was finally coming to me. I looked down at my hands, coated in the same gruesome slurry that covered the floor. This stuff was on every plate, in every apartment, in every stomach in the city above. They just didn't know it. I did. I closed my eyes, and for the first time since the ordeal began, I didn't feel anything at all. The weeks that followed were a blur of antiseptic white rooms, the gentle beeping of medical monitors, and the muffled, sympathetic voices of nurses. They rebuilt me with polished steel pins and synthetic tissue grafts, piece by broken piece. They told me I was lucky, a hero, the sole survivor of a tragic, unforeseeable industrial accident. One day, a man who wasn't a doctor came to visit. He wore a suit so perfectly tailored it seemed less like fabric and more like a second skin. He introduced himself as a vice president of risk mitigation for Syn-Chow. He never used the word creatures. He spoke of a virulent, unexpectedly aggressive bacterial culture that had caused a system-wide containment failure. He slid a data slate across my bedside table, its surface glowing with an impressive number of zeros. A full pension, effective immediately, he said, his voice smooth as polished glass. For your trauma, for your silence, for your heroism in preventing the contamination from spreading beyond sub-level 7. I didn't say a word. I just looked at him, at his clean fingernails, his expensive watch. I knew he ate the same nutrient paste as everyone else. I wondered if he knew what was in it. Or maybe he did and simply didn't care. It was just another cost of doing business, the true cost of consumption. I nodded once, and he smiled, a brief, predatory flash of perfect teeth. He collected his slate and left me in the sterile silence. Later that evening, a cheerful nurse brought in my dinner. It was the first solid food they'd allowed me. She placed the tray on my table with a flourish. "Time to build up your strength, Kalen. Can't live on nutrient drips forever." On the tray was a standard portion of Syn-Chow Grade A nutrient paste. It sat in a neat, gray, circular mound on a clean white plate. Odorless, featureless, safe. I stared at it. And in my memory, the smell rose up, thick and inescapable. The stench of the red harvest, the coppery reek of the slurry, the chemical burn of ammonia, the primal, swampy odor of the creature's lair. It wasn't just a memory, it was a ghost on my tongue, a physical presence in the back of my throat. I saw the featureless faces, The multi-jointed limbs, the writhing mass pulled into the grinding teeth of the machine. I saw Elias's arm, his ID band still on his wrist. My stomach heaved. The nurse was saying something, but I couldn't hear her over the phantom roar of the grinders in my head. With a steady, deliberate hand, I reached out. My fingers, still stiff and scarred, closed around the edge of the tray. I pushed it away from me, across the table, until it sat on the far edge. An empty plate was a small thing, a quiet gesture, but it was the only piece of defiance I had left. They could rebuild my body, buy my silence, and rewrite the truth into a tidy accident report, but they could never, ever make me eat again.